This is Gemara Pesachim Daf Ayin Hey. Today's shir should be a schos for Shlema for Yitzchak Chaim Yitzchak Moshe ben Esther Rezol. We're looking forward to hearing a complete recovery. Of course, all our Chaylim Chaim Yitzchak Melki Umedim and Ikir Men Vegel Chaim Ben Slash Bechil Tzibon Nasile Huva Shlem Tzibon Rizi Edel Zarbas Kenentel Basim Chayisay Yisrael Ben Mindol as a president of Shavlei Shalom Asnamim Shafik Shulchan David Niteriva Shmuel Ben Tehila Daniel Ben Chan Rizam Lechai Bas Mina Librocha Bas Tavia Musa Besel Shachli Yisrael, as well as the schos Zivug for Atalea Bas Ita. And let's pick it up on the bottom of Ayin Dalet Amud Beis as we're heading into the seventh parak, the parak that's dealing with the exact process of how to roast the Karban Pesach, the Ketzad Soilin. Yesterday we began the process, and today we're going to pick it up. Towards the end of yesterday's daf, we got into a discussion of dam, of blood, and blood, of course, it's forbidden to eat, and we discussed different applications and different ways of cooking items that the blood either does fly out or the blood sits there, and if the blood sits there, it's an issue that you're eating blood. We discussed the case where we have a piece of meat, an animal with raw meat that was stuck inside, and the question is, as you cook it, are we afraid that the blood from the inside animal is going to infect the outside animal? But now we pick it up at the bottom of Ayin Dalet Amud Beis, 5 lines before the white lines. Hi umsa, this raw meat or this partially raw meat, the ismik, which is red, chalye, so then its gravy is aser. It's aser because if it's red, we assume the gravy is blood in it. Lo ismik, if it's not red, chalye shari, the gravy is mutter. Ravina amar afilu lo ismik, even if it's not red, nami chalye aser. Ravina is a bit more machmir. This is a bit reminiscent of the opinion of Ravina that we had a bit up top, that Ravina taught us. It's very similar to this. Ravina was also machmir in all those cases. Ravina versus Rav Sheshes. But says the Gemara, why is Ravina machmir over here? Yavshir the last base shiraika dama. There's a little bit of the streaks of blood, and therefore it says Ravina, this meat, this raw meat, even if it's not red, it's still going to be forbidden. Amarle marbar amimar Ravashi. Abba migmale gmuyi. He told over a testimony that his father would eat this meat and he would swallow it. He was not concerned with the, as Rashi says, migmala. He wasn't concerned with the gravy. He wasn't concerned with the meat. He could yami. Some explain Ravashi gufei migmale gomei. Ravashi was one that swallowed it. Amarle marbar amimar Ravashi. Abba hay cholod the cholod bay. Once the vinegar was used to soak the meat at one time, he no longer would use it to soak it. He didn't have the same power to absorb out the meat, the blood, once it was used one time. Maishna, says the Gemara, what's the difference between the challah, which the vinegar, mitamaha, the chaltina lay, whereas when it comes to the other types of liquids that we would soak in it, mitama, as you see in Rashi in the last, the Rashi in the Amit says chalosh meikara de chatlina bay, that it's a bit weaker. Says the Gemara, hasam isei likiyue. As we move along to Ayin Hey Amud Aleph, over there likiyue de peira be'enei, the peri, is evident over there. Hacha less likiyue de peri, and again that's just reminiscent and shows us whether the vinegar is strong or not. If the stronger vinegar, you could use the meat to soak it in more than once. If not, not. And that's the problem with the blood that's going to come out of there. Because, of course, the vinegar is going to absorb the blood, and therefore we have to be concerned that there's going to be blood in the vinegar. Says the Gemara, "Ein soilin es Pesach." We continue. The Mishnah said, "You're not allowed to soil in the Pesach." And one of the items that you weren't allowed to soil in the Pesach, which is a word that we said we're going to explain right now, is an asachla, which is a form of grill. Says the Gemara. But then the Mishnah continued and it said a story with Rav Gamliel that he told his servant Tavi to roast him a Karban Pesach on what? On the grill. Says the Gemara, "Ma'aseh Lister." The Mishnah is bringing a story to contradict itself. Answers the Gemara, "Chasuri mechavav achibtani." We have to add words into the Mishnah. Ve'im asachla minu kav. If the grill is perforated, if there's a hole in the grate, mutter. Now that you told me a differentiation between a regular grill and a grill with holes, now I'll tell you the story of Rav Gamliel with his servant, on this grate that has holes. And you see over here, on the left side of your screen, you see a regular grate, and that's what's going to be forbidden, because that's going to be metal, like we said yesterday, and then it's not going to be a real sliage. Whereas you see on the right side of your screen, you see the grate, a regular grill that has holes in it, and the fire, that's called sliage, because it's cooking directly from the fire, and not from the grates. Says the Gemara, about 10 lines down, first word in line is Ava, Taner Shesikua Biklibe Arla. We have an oven. This should sound familiar, as we've had this previously. You have an oven that is fueled with the shells, the husks of arla, which obviously you're not allowed to get benefit from him, v'garfai, and then you shovel out, that's reminiscent of the word garf v'katam, garfai, you shovel out all the shells of the arla, and then va'afa ba'is, and then you break bread in this oven, meaning, you have an oven that was fueled with a forbidden fuel source, but right now the fuel source is not there. Can you cook in this oven? Says the Gemara, L'divrei ha'oser ma'u. According to those who say it's generally forbidden, as Rashi says, look in Rashi, 3 lines into the narrow lines. According to Rabbi Omer Apasa Surah, according to Rabbi who says in general you cannot cook with this forbidden fuel source, even bake bread on it. What is the story in this case? Amrle responded, Apas Muteres. Over here, the pas is going to be mutter because the actual fuel, the actual wood of the arla is no longer here. Amrle, so you responded, Amar Rav Chana Saba, Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rav Yechlan. Tanur says you have a garf. You have an oven which is fueled, and then the garfa, you shovel out all the coals. And obviously that's why you bring this in over here. And then you roast the carbon pesach in the oven. That's not called sli'esh, even though, again, what's the case? You have an oven that you put in coals and whatnot, wood. Then you take it out. That's not called roasted by the fire. What's the reason? And this is very important. The reason is what we're asking the question from. Shenemar, the pasuk says, Sli'esh, Sli'esh. Shtei pamim 2 times. So says the Gemara, only by the carbon pesach time, the Gali Rachmana Sli'esh, Sli'esh, Shtei pamim, because it says Sli'esh 2 times, that's the reason why it's not called Sli'esh. Halai Gali Rachmana. But if the Torah did not say that, Havamina would have thought Sli'eshu, it is called Sli'esh. And what's this case? There's no actual fire there anymore, so we're asking a question. We just said a moment ago that the bread is going to be mutter once you remove the klipe arla, once you remove their fitted bread and fuel source. But sounds over here from this case, you have the same oven, it's also fueled with a fuel source, and you take out the fuel source, and it sounds like it's still an issue. Only because by Karban Pesach said Sli'esh, Sli'esh. That's the reason why it's not called that it has to be, it's not called Sli'esh, but in general, it would be called Sli'esh, even though the actual Esh is not there. So why in our case are we saying that it's not called, that it's going to be mutter, the bread, Amar Legal, Rachmana, Asam, Yalfina, Minei? The first teretz says, the Torah revealed to us the aside, the idea, with regard to the Karban Pesach, and we learn out from there to all other cases. So even in our case, when it comes to the oven with the klipe arla will also be forbidden, even though will be mutter, just like Sli'esh. Viba Yisema, second teretz. Sometimes it goes Rachman Sli'esh Amim. The reason why the carbon pesach that it's not called roasted by a fire is because it's Sli'esh 2 times. Let's say it did not say Sli'esh 2 times. What would you have thought? What's the Havamina? You would have thought that it's on fire, that you have a real fire. And maybe even if you remove the coals, it's called Sli'esh. That's what you would have thought. So the Torah had to say Sli'esh 2 times. But in our case of what? The Klipe Arla. What's the difference? Meaning there's an integral difference between what we need by a Karban Pesach, what you can't do by the Klipe Arla. By the Karban Pesach, it's a positive. What do you need? Fire. So there's no fire, so you need to have a special pasuk. But by us, what is Aser? What's Aser is the Klipe Arla, the shells of the Arla. Back into the Gemara. The issue is having forbidden wood. And the wood is not here, and therefore we don't need a pasuk at all. Once the wood is not here, it's not called cooking from the klipe arla, and therefore it's going to be permitted. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon, new sugya. Chatchay v'nasnai al gabe gachalim. You cut up your carbon pesach and you place it on top of gachalim coals. One very important point. What does it mean you cut it up? So Rashi says it doesn't mean you actually cut it up. Rashi about 10 lines into the narrow line says that you made like little grooves in the meat to make it cook faster. You didn't actually cut into different pieces because it has to be cooked all together. But you make grooves in the meat, but you cooked it on coals. That's the question. What is the status of cooking on coals? Is coals called Sli'esh roasting or not? Rabbi says, Sli'esh. This is called Sli'esh, and this din of Rabbi is going to be a point of contention basically for the rest of the day. Are coals considered roasting by fire? Rabbi says yes. Says Gemara, Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda asked the question to Rav Chisda. Is that true that Rabbi really holds gacholim or fire? There's different tzoras, different negoyim. One of the negoyim is when you get burnt by a fire, certain shays, etc., are a din of a nega and a tumah and saras, etc. So makas ish, says the Torah. Ainly elish nichva beish, you're burnt by a fire. Nichva begacheles, if you're burnt by cold, beremet, with ashes, besid, with lime, roseach, that's boiling. Ugefasim roseach, or boiling gefasim. V'chol davar abam in or any item that comes from a fire. La suye, what does that come to include? Chamei ar, boiling hot water. Minayin, how do you know that's also going to be called a michva makois ish and create this nega? Tamaloymar michva riba. Says michva 2 times to include this. Says the Gemara. It's only because, what do we see over here? We see a site about kachalim, about coals. Only because the Torah went out of the way to say michva 2 times. That's why coals have a din of eish. If it didn't say michva 2 times, gechalim are not eish. And you just told me that gechalim, yes, have a din of eish. Says the Gemara, Amar le, gacheles shel eish, loy itzterich. A gacheles of eish, a coals of fire, loy itzterich. We don't need a pasuk to come and include that. What do we need the pasuk to come to include? To coals of metal. That's what the pasuk is coming to include. But it's true that really regular coals made out of wood, that we don't need a pasuk. And now Rebbe's din stands. Again, this whole story began because Rebbe taught us that when it comes to Karban Pesach, if you cook it on gachalim, on coals, it's called eish. We seemingly saw that it's not called eish because the only reason why it's called eish by michvah because it says it 2 times. Says the Gemara, no, that's regular coals and metal coals. Says the Gemara, is that true? Metal coals are not called eish. When it comes to bas koyin, if a bas koyin is mezanav, it says in the pasuk, "Be'eish tisarei," she must be burned. Her punishment is they would make a wick of lead, and that's what they would use to burn her. So we see that it is called eish. Says Yehosam, we see that lead is a form of metal, and we see that as a din of eish. Says the Gemara, Shiny Yehosam damar kra be'eish tisaref. Tisaref, the actual word ba'eish, in fire, tisaref, you should burn. Tisaref, the rabbis call saref as abaz min eish. All forms of burning from fire, and that's the reason why over there that the gacholim have a din of eish. For kol shkein eish atzma, and certainly, 1 second, and therefore that's the reason why it's din of eish, so it's not a steer to us. Ask the Gemara, 1 second. For kol shkein eish atzma, when it comes to burning this woman who was mizana, this bas koyin, the daughter of a koyin that was mizana, it says in the Torah that she has to be pouring molten lead down her throat. What do you mean? If you're telling me molten lead has a din of eish, so eish itself has a din of eish, right? Yes. So therefore, surround her with a bundle of twigs, Vinikla, and set her on fire. Meaning the whole point is to burn her. So why don't we just burn her with a regular fire? Says Gemara, Asya Sreifer me Aaron. We learn out the word Sreifer from the children of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu. Malahalan, just like by Nadav and Avihu, Sreifer's Neshama v'Gov Kayim, that the fire went inside them. That their Neshama was burnt, but their external body was Mikayam, was alive, that was extant. Avkan, Sreifer's Neshama v'Gov Kayim. So too over here, and that's the reason why the way to kill this woman, the skila, the Sreifer that she requires, is by pouring the molten lead down her throat, which burns out her insides but keeps her body intact. Says Mar, 1 second. Why don't we just use boiling hot water? Answers the Gemara, Misham the Rav Nachman, a poor in Yisaid. Tom Rav Nachman, Amar Krav, you gotta love your friend. And from there we learn out, even this woman who was Mizana, you have to love her. Bar Loi Misa Yafa, you gotta give her a good Misa. And therefore, which is such an incredible idea, even when one does something wrong, we have to kill them. The way to kill them has to be in a nice way. And molten lead is the most painless way, less than boiling hot water, and that's what you should do. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Now that we have this din of Rav Nachman, that the reason why we use molten lead, because that's a misa yafeh, that's a pleasant way at some level of killing her. Gzeir shava lamali. So why do we need Gzeir shava teach me that molten lead is a din of eish, and therefore you're allowed to use that? Maybe you just use it like Rav Nachman, bar like misa yafeh, you have to give a good misa. Amri says the Gemara, ilav Gzeir shava, not Gzeir shava, amina sreifas nesham of gov kayim lav sreifahi. We would never have known. I'm sorry, why do we need Gzeir shava from the children of Aaron? Says the Gemara, because we would never have known that if you burn someone from the inside, that has a din of sreifa. How do we know that? And therefore we learn out from the Bnei Aaron. V'misham der Nachman. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Maybe you should surround her with twigs again, so that she should be burnt very fast. Thomas Bagala, Kamash Malon. That's why we learned out that you need to use the molten lead. It is called a stream from burning from the inside. That's what we learned out from the Bnei Aaron, and that's the reason why the misa that she receives is this molten lead. Vela be'esh lamali. So why did the Torah have to say ba'esh? Lafuke avar, to come include this lead, this molten lead, meikara. I'm sorry, lafuke avar meikara, new type, which Rashi speaks out. What's referred to over here is that there was lead that you take out of the ground. It's a tolda of eish, and it's boiling out on its own. So it comes to include even that type of lead you could use for this misa. Amar lei Ravi, and that's the end of this piece of Gemara. So we proved that from the Bnei Aaron, we proved from the molten lead, that again, when it comes to the din of Rebbe, what was the din of Rebbe? That if you cook the carbon pesach, I shouldn't say cook, you roast the carbon pesach on coals, that is called sli eish. We had a question from the fact that the Torah seemingly needed to include a nega from nichve, and we're answering no, we're answering from the fact that was special over there, because the difference between metal coals and regular coals, and therefore regular coals, says the Gemara, does yes have a din of tzli eish. Amar le Rav Yirmi le Rav Zera v'cholecha dekasev ba'eish tisaref l'rabbis kol shreifos abayis machmas eishu. Are you telling me that any time the Torah says ba'eish tisaref, like you just learned out from that benais kayin, that what it means to burn her in any way possible? V'gabi parim and it's rough, and there's certain chatais that the karbanos, that the way they would have to burn them, and it says over there t'chsuvu v'sari v'yisayal eitzim ba'eish, says you should burn them on fire. So according to what you just said, ba'eish tisaref, that combination means any form of burning. V'tanya, we learned in the brayso ba'eish, it has to be specifically with fire, v'loy bisid, and not with line mertzeach, which is boiling, v'loy b'kvas mertzeach, and now with boiling kavasim. So what's going on? You just told me that b'eish tisaref seemingly comes to include everything. Amar le yachi ashta. Ha samiksiv ba'ish v'hadar tisaref. By us, the rabbis call shreivas abayis machlaseish. That comes to include everything. Ha, but over here by the chatais v'saraf oisai ala itzim ba'ish libasoif ish lememra ends with ish lememra the ish in midachrini life. The best the pasuk concludes with ish, gives it more of an emphasis, and it has to be specifically with ish. Ha says Gemara 1 second. Asanami ksiv srifa libasoif. Dersev, it also says burning at the end. As the pasuk says, we move along to Ayin Beis al Shavcha Adeshin Yisaref, that with regard to the ashes, that what does it say in the Torah? It says that you should place the ashes covered and Yisaref you should burn. So we see that the word Sreifa is at the end of the pasuk, which means specifically Sreifa. Amri, they answered, "Oh, Yisaref, what's that for? We need it for a different price. Yisaref avol bisha in sham deshen. You have to burn it even though there's no ash. Yisaref avol bisha oitzi armi rubai. Even if the item is majority consumed, and one would think if the item is majority consumed with fire, you don't have to deal with it anymore." Says Rashi, no. Says Rashi, when it comes to the Chumas Hadeshen, you have to sit there and you have to deal with it even though the majority is filled with fire. So you think you did your own? No, you still have to sit there, you still have to tent it until it is completely burnt. That is the end of this Gemara with regard to Rebbe. Again, what was Rebbe? The same thing we keep on coming back to. Rebbe was the din that taught us that you're allowed to take the Karban Pesach and put it on coals, and that is called Sli Eish. Ravina now is going back on that din of Rebbe. We asked on Rebbe from Michveh. We asked from the case of Saras that seemingly needed a special pasuk to teach me that Gacholim, that coals have a din of Eish. Says Ravina, I have a different teretz. Ravina Amar Kruch V'tani, tie it together and learn as follows. Makas Eish, when the Torah says you should be hit by fire. How do you know? Meaning, right there, that was the answer. So for the fact that the Torah says Makas Eish, we already know Eish and Gacheles, and therefore we know that Gacheles, the coals, is called Eish. He just learns the price a little bit differently. But Nichve, Beremetz, with ash, with boiling lime, with boiling yefes, with chol davar and everything else about Machmazar, last to include boiling hot water. Where do we know that from? But the point was, he took kacheles, he took coals, and he put in the first part of the brisa, and that was pashid as a form of eish. And that is how Ravina answers the question on Rebbe, and therefore we concluding that what taking the korban pesach, putting it on the gacholim, yes, has a din of tzli eish, roasting on a fire. Rami asked the stira. Miyama Rebbe gacholim creation. Did Rebbe really say that the coals are called eish? Vereminu, I'll ask you a stira. When it says gacholim, I would think that the coals are smoldering, means they're on the way out. Tamalay eish, it says fire. Eish, if there would have said fire, yachol shall have this. I would think it has to actually be with a flame. Tamalay gacholei, teaching me that no, it could be a coals. Hakeitzan, maybe min when the coals are flickering. So 1 second. second. The Gemara pauses for a second and says, what's going on over here? Says the Gemara, Valgufa Kash is talking about the Havaita of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim. He's taking the scoop of these boiling hot coals. Says the Gemara, 1 second. What you just said is inherently contradictory. You said Gachale, the first word is coals, Yachalaimais. That comes to teach me smoldering coals. Alma, what do we see? Loich Ashais, Eishtenu. What do we see? That when it's flickering, that's actually a din of Eish, of fire. But in Seifa, what does the Seifa say? That Eish, if it just said Eish, I would have thought Yachal Shalev is an actual flame. Tamalaimer Gachale. So therefore the Torah had come along and say coals. Now we see that flickering does not have a din in Eish. So we have a stira. What is flickering? What is smoldering? What is Eish? What is gacheles? Which way does it go? V'amarav Sheishas, he explains, Gachele, calls Yachal bin Aimus bin Leichashais. I would think whether they're smoldering, meaning they're on the way out, bin Leichashais, whether they're flickering, whether there's still a fire there. Tama Loimar Eish. The Torah says Eish. Eish, for the fact that the Torah said Eish, Yachal, I would think, shall have this. I would think that what does it have to be an Eish, a real flame? Tama Loimar Gachale, that has to be a coals. How do you fulfill both of these verses? Maybe min aloichashais mikol makaim. Maybe min aloichashais. You bring from the flickering ones, and therefore you get both. It's on the way. It's a little bit out. It's a little bit light. You have the fact that it's a flame. You have the fact that it's going out, and that is the way the Kohen Gadol did the avodah. Says Gemara, 1 second. Mikol makom gachalim lo yikriyesh. Kasha the Rebbe. At the end of the day, for this whole story, what do we see clearly? That gachalim, that coals, are not called eish. Says the Gemara, L'Rebbe, Yasha L'Rebbe, Amar Abaya Tiritachi. Explain as follows. Gachale, Yachal Oimais V'lo Eloi Chashes. When it says Gachale, I would think only Oimais when it's going out and not when it's flickering. Tamalaymar Eish. Therefore says Eish. Eish Yachal writes shall have this Yavi writes a Gacheles Yavi, and that's the important line. Now, the way that Abaya is learning that what the word Gacheles does refer to an Eish. So you would think when the Torah says Eish, you would think it means Gacheles. Tamalaymar Gachale. Okay, Tzad. Maybe the flickering ones, and therefore says the Gemara, we don't have a steer anymore, and therefore that's the way we're going to be Makai in both of these psukim. So fine, the Gemara concluded, and the Gemara explains how the word Gacholim could mean Eish, and we don't have a Kasha on Rebbe anymore. But says the Gemara, Omar Rabba, 1 second. Rotza Gacheles Yavi, Rotza Shalavis Yavi. You just told me you could either bring a Gacheles, a coal, or a Shalavis, a flame. Shalavis, bli Gacheles, Echemish Gachesla. That's physically impossible. How can you have a flame without a coal? Kigayin explains the Gemara, the Shafi Lamana Mishcha, you take a vessel, you take a keli, you smear it with oil on the outside, Vetzli Beinura, and you light it on fire. And maybe that was the Hava Mina that you could bring that. Says the Gemara, what? That's what you needed a pasuk to tell me? That you can't bring, that the Kohen Gadol can't use a flaming vessel? How lamali kram? Why do we need a pasuk lamuti to exclude that? In front of a king of flesh and blood. You would never bring that in. Why not? Explains Rashi. If you take a vessel and you smear it with oil, and then you do what? And then you light it on fire, it smokes terribly. So you never bring in such a smoking item to a regular king. It's the Kohen Gadol, Yom Kippur, he's going to him. He's going to bring in such a thing. What was the Havamina? Hello, my Rava, Tiritachi, explain as follows. Gachale, when the Torah says coals, Yachalei Mamais V'loi Leichashes. I would think it means smoldering and not flickering. Tamalei Meish, if it said Eish Yachal Yavi Machatz Gacheles, Umachatz Shalheves. I would think, you know what it could be? It could be half coals and half flickering. At the aisle, and on the way, as the Kohen Gadol is walking into the Kodesh HaShadashim, the Gavai, have a kuli gacheles. As he's walking in, the flames are going to subside, and then it's going to be coals, and that way he'll be Makayim. What the pasuk says that it's gacheles. Talmud Leimar on that, no. V'lokach malei machle gachle yesh. The Kohen Gadol has to take a shovel full of coals me'al hamizbeach, from on the mizbeach. Which, of course, I'm sorry if I didn't explain this the whole time. If anyone was confused, we're talking about the Avaita when the Kohen Gadol took the shovel and he picked up the coals, and he had to bring these coals into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and then he would take the and he would have to put on top of the coals, which is quite difficult because the ketayres was in a spoon, and then he had this shovel. So one mahalach was he put one under one arm and one under another arm, and therefore he had the hand in order to take the kmitza, or maybe use his mouth, different pshatim. But therefore says the pasuk, you take the coals from the mizbech, so we learn out from the moment you take them have to be coals, and it's not going to work if they turn into coals as you walk into Kodesh HaKadoshim. And with this we'll conclude. Ibailu asked the Gemara, which we've had many times already in Shabbos and Brachas here, is the word aimamais. This word smoldering, the word that after the flames go off of coals with an aleph or an ayin. The word is with an ayin. That is the word aimamais. We'll pick up from the Mishnah tomorrow.